It is Thursday, the 11th of January, 2018, and you're listening to Skeptics with a K, the podcast for science, reason, and critical thinking. Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptic Society, a non-profit organisation for the promotion of scientific skepticism on Merseyside, around the UK, and internationally. I am your host, Mike Hall. With me today is Marsh.
Hello.
Alice.
Hello.
And our special guest, it's Emma.
Hello.
Fresh from having done QED not too long ago as well.
That feels like ages ago now.
It does feel like a long time ago.
I mean, when was QED? Like 2 months ago? 3 months ago?
It was a while ago.
3 months ago, I think it was, QED.
Yeah, forever ago, really.
You know.
Is this your second time on SWAC or third time?
Third, although
Third
you
time.
might not want to talk about the first time.
The first time was the drunk show, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wasn't a proper official episode.
Was it not a proper official episode?
No, I put it out as a special because I daren't use a genuine episode number on that shite.
No, that is.
People occasionally
that is
ask us to redo it, to do
true.
another one.
Maybe we will,
Yeah.
and maybe we won't be as drunk. And by
Dreadful.
we, I mean me.
Dreadful masochists write in and ask us to do it again. It's what
I
they
think
do.
I like the idea. Could you do it better this time? Because what you pulled off last time was not what I expected and not what I wanted.
There's also an equal number of people who tell us never to do it
Never
again.
do it again because it's an awful idea. So Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year.
2018.
Yep.
We started the show in 2009.
Well, we did in the sense
And
you and I did.
and it's now 2018.
Alice hasn't been on it that long.
That's a long time to be doing a
I've been on
podcast.
it quite a while,
It's
just
quite
not
a while.
that long.
Did you join in 2012 or 2013?
I can't remember. It was like 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. We will, I think, in the next 12 months.
It'll be 4 years in April, I think.
Alice
good.
will pass Colin as the number of episodes count. May well have passed Colin in minutes on air already because we've been doing longer shows recently.
That's true.
But
She's passed both of us in terms of popularity as well. So
oh, absolutely. If you go to Google and search Skeptics with a K, it auto completes to Alice and placebos. It's the two things. The two things that it does.
You don't care about anything I have to say. Pretty soon it'll be like placebos, Alice, and Emma McClure. And I'll be like, what the fuck, guys?
So it's a new year, which is good. Did everyone have a nice Christmas? How was Christmas?
I mean, it was all right, but we have to address the elephant in the room in that you haven't provided us a drink.
No
You
tea.
normally make us a cup of tea.
I do know
I
tea.
brought my own drink.
You
I
have
normally
brought an
bring a
old drink.
bottle of water, but I didn't.
I've got cans of pop.
I brought my own Coke because I don't drink tea or coffee.
But you could have made us a cup of tea.
I don't think I could.
How many cups of tea have you made in your life?
Maybe 5.
5. And how well were they received?
I think almost all of them had corrections afterwards.
Was it correction sense that someone took it away to fix it? Or was it like feedback notes? I'd sit down, come on, how are you doing? You okay? So let's talk through this.
No, they took it away and they would put more milk in or put the tea bag back in.
Came back with a bit of red pen on it. 2 out of 10.
So how would you go
See
about
me.
making a cup of tea for Alice, do you think?
Well, first of all, I'd asked if she was sure that she wanted me to do it. And then I would boil the kettle.
Yes.
Good start.
And then I would put that boiled water into a mug. And then I would put the bag in the water
Right.
Okay.
for a while.
What kind of while?
A minute?
A minute. Okay.
Okay, a minute.
Okay.
Are you timing that?
I don't know. I might stir it a bit with a spoon.
Okay, that's good. And then what are you going to do?
A teaspoon.
A teaspoon. Good. Yeah, that's good.
Clues in the name.
And then I would take the bag out.
You take the bag out at that point, okay.
It's a smart move. I've had more than one cup of tea where that didn't happen.
I would ask Alice if she wanted any milk or sugar.
Okay, those are the two things you're allowed. That's good.
And then,
Or lemon if we're going crazy.
No, we're not going to do that.
no. And then I would put
That's advanced stuff.
I
This
would-
is entry-level tea we're talking.
I would put the things that Alice had asked for in the tea.
What if Alice said, yeah, I'll have some milk?
I would ask for more direction.
Because you know how particular people can be about milk in their tea. Because your wife, Marsh, has like a quarter of a teaspoon of milk in her tea.
a comically low amount of milk. An offensively low amount. But enough milk to make it worthwhile, but not enough milk to stop you getting weird looks in every single coffee shop you ever go into. When you have to get a teaspoon out and put like a tiny, like a
You need
fairy
a tea
teardrop
pipette.
of tea. I do need a tea pipette to carry around at all times. That's the only way, really. Well, that's not bad. I think that would kind of get you there.
Yeah.
Although Alice would not want the tea in for a minute.
Well, if the hot water hasn't been poured directly onto the bag, then maybe a minute would be okay.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, that was the only fundamental flaw in, your tea description. There was
the hot water into a cup.
Hot water into an empty mug.
That was controversial. And I think you lost a lot of listeners early on. And it was only when you then put the bag into the water.
You did well with getting it to the right level and then adding the milk. That's not a thing that people agree on, but that's definitely the right way to do it.
You knew not to do milk first.
Milk first is awful.
Well done, me. I am 30 years old.
No involvement of a pot, controversially.
I think teapots are largely out of fashion, except in fashionable places.
Okay,
I'm
trying to pass that sentence.
It's hipster. It's quite hipster.
Yeah, if you went to a tea shop, you might get a little teapot.
Well, you'd have a teapot with leaf tea.
Yeah.
Right.
You'd have the leaf strainer.
But even if you've got like a bagged tea at a coffee type place or a tea type place, you'd get that sometimes in a pot.
I'd only ever bother making tea in a pot if I was making tea for like 5 people. In which case it might be... It's never worthwhile, because if I am making tea for 5 people, one of them's Nicola, one of them's Warren, and one of them's me, who all have our teas in increasing levels of weird ways.
Yeah.
So there's too much precision involved. Whereas, like, if you were just making a standard cup of tea, pot of tea for 5 people, it's easier to make it in a pot.
But I would say Nicola likes us... I mean, this is going on probably longer than listeners care about.
They seem to like when we talk about random
we don't talk about
food
skepticism. You like yours quite weak.
Yeah.
Warren likes his relatively
pretty strong. Not
yeah.
quite as strong as Nicola, though.
So I think, and I'm somewhere in the middle, so I think a pot is the perfect solution.
And pour mine out.
And just pour it in order. Yeah, exactly. We just need a timer on the pot. Emma's hit onto the right thing in actual having a timer.
Also, we can add even more precision to our tea making. We already have to measure out the sugar and the milk in teaspoons.
For you guys, for me, you just like get the milk and then pour a bit into the cup and pull it away again, and I'll drink it. It's fine.
But what a pot enables is the ability to pour the tea into the milk and not the other way around.
Yeah.
Which you can't get with mug-based tea, because that would involve putting milk on the tea bag, which is, you're basically a Nazi if you put milk on the tea bag.
Yeah, it's definitely wrong.
Or otherwise, having a solution in your cup, which is just milk and hot water. Which makes you feel physically creeped out for some reason that I can't put my finger on.
Real.
And Emma looks like she's going to throw up.
That's because milk's on the... this will make the conversation go on way too long, but milk's on the no, never, ever list of things milk's that I won't consume.
Ever. Emma has an unusual...
I have an unusual diet.
You're quite a picky eater,
basically. I would describe myself as a very fussy eater. I eat like a fussy toddler and never grew out of it.
That's in terms of what you eat, not how you eat.
Yes.
It's not like you sit in a high chair and smear it all over your face.
No. Yeah.
Although you don't enjoy using cutlery.
I don't eat anything that requires cutlery.
Yeah. Emma would use a knife to butter bread, but she wouldn't then sit down and eat with a knife and fork.
Sometimes I do for fun in restaurants. I eat my chips with it to pretend I'm a grown-up.
But you can't eat chips with a fork. Like fish shop chips, you'd want to eat with a fork because they get it A, a bit too hot, and B, a bit too greasy.
I don't eat chip shop chips very often.
Okay, are they on the no list or the never ever list?
More on the no list.
They're on the no list.
Yeah.
But chips are on the yes list.
Yeah.
Milk is not on the never ever list for Luke Skywalker.
That's a segue. He says another thing that we don't need to talk about on a skeptical show.
He says in a massive segue. So someone pointed out that every time we do a segue, we ruin it by pointing out how good a segue it was.
Yeah, I like that.
Now I'm pointing out that we point out that we're ruining the segue by pointing out how good a segue it was. I think it's a double drink if I'm kind of meta drinking it. I saw Star Wars over Christmas.
I think we've all seen Star Wars at this point.
I saw it yesterday.
I quite like probably spoilers for Star Wars at this point.
Yeah, this will be spoilers.
Although I would dare to suggest that anyone who really gets annoyed about Star Wars spoilers will have seen Star Wars by now.
Yeah.
You don't wait this long to see a film that you're that annoyed about. Yeah, so I saw Star Wars, so it was good.
It was good. I enjoyed it as well.
It was all right. It was fine. It was fun.
There were some things that I wasn't so keen on. I wasn't very keen on the Mary Poppins bit.
No, that bit,
which I think wound everyone up.
Yeah, that bit really stood out.
Everyone thought that was the bit where they were sort of removing her from the film because she had passed away.
Yeah,
yeah.
But no.
Which they could have done because she does nothing for the rest of the film.
Yeah,
she's in a coma for the next hour and then comes out in time to say to Poe Dameron, no, she was right, and that's all she does for the rest of the film. She does nothing. So the scene with Luke milking the 4-breasted space cow,
I had no problem with that.
it was just unnecessary.
I didn't think it was that unnecessary.
It was utterly unnecessary.
It was just to try and weird her out a bit, get her to fuck off.
It was especially unnecessary that the cow had 4 independent nipply breasts.
What do you mean by independent?
Well, not so. Like cows have got 1 large breast with 4 nipples on it.
Right.
This alien cow had 4 large breasts with a nipple each, which, evolutionary speaking, is not terribly efficient.
But maybe it is, because cows get, what is that infection that they get in their... Mastitis, because their udder drags through shit. Whereas if you have 4 independent udders, then maybe only one of them is going to get mastitis.
Well, also, cows don't, sit up on the edge of the beach like this thing
That's
did.
also another good evolutionary advantage to not getting mastitis, unless the cow also
sitting on the beach
projects its shit upwards into the air. Like some sort of bovine fountain. A bovine fountain of effluence.
So I found that scene unnecessary. I get the point that they were trying to make that, Luke's life on this island is utterly mundane, but you could have done it without the bizarre 4-breasted cow thing.
Well, I think it wasn't that it was meant to be mundane. It was meant to be a bit treacherous as well, because he's got that weird spiky stick that he uses to stab stuff, which is I've got to do a spiky stick thing.
They did reasonably well without involving any breasts.
I was fine with the cow thing. I've heard people very annoyed by the little porg bird monster thing.
They were fine.
I assume that they've been put in there purely to sell toys.
Yeah. Well, that's how people have said, it's really cynical. That's one of the things I hate about this film, is how cynical those things are. I was like, fuck off, Ewoks. At least the Porgs weren't the saving, didn't save the day and bring down the entire empire like the Ewoks did.
And they weren't in it loads, like
they were just knocking about.
Other things that they used to try and sell stuff.
No, they were quite subtle, I thought, the Porgs. I thought they were quite nice. They had that little scene with Chewbacca yelling at them and him kind of feeling guilty. I thought, that was good. That was fine.
But they didn't do anything, so it was fine.
That was okay.
Yeah, to come back to effluence, Andrew's dad, who is 86, we took him to see it, and his review was a 1-word review, which was shit.
Gotcha.
But he also said that must have cost a few bob.
Right. Well, he was right on one of those counts at the very least.
Yes.
He had nothing else to say about it?
No,
that was it. He had never favourite bit, didn't have a worst bit?
He did sleep through most of it.
Okay. Were those his favourite bits?
I don't know.
Is that why he thinks it's shit? So, they weren't even on that ship before. How they got to there, and who's this person? I don't know why they're there.
Maybe I didn't know. I didn't question him further.
Well, this is what you got to get to the nub of the issue. You are a solicitor, Emma. I expect you to grill a witness to get to the absolute truth. Where was your training? Why didn't it kick in? Cross-examine your father-in-law.
My father-in-law with dementia.
Permission to treat him as a hostile witness.
I thought I'd talk about sunshine and rainbows or something, because last time I was talking about really dark, horrible stuff.
It was quite dark, sinister stuff last time you were on the show.
Yeah.
So we've got something light and cheerful this time.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about sex offenders.
Right.
Again.
Okay,
that's good. Pattern emerging.
Last week and now dragging into this week, the top news story in the UK has been quite a lot to do with my job. Everyone's been very up in arms and very angry on what on the surface appears to be a really unsafe, horrid decision by the Parole Board to release a very dangerous man from prison. Have people seen this?
I have seen this. But I don't know very much about this chap apart from the headlines.
The headlines themselves have said things like, John Warboys to be freed after 8 years, that's just 2 weeks for each of his 200 victims. Or the Daily Mail said, how can justice have been served? Fury is black cab rapist John Warboys, who attacked over 100 women, is to be freed from jail after serving just 6 weeks per victim. I think they're from the same paper.
Is that how we do sentencing now, is on a per victim basis?
Yes.
I mean, technically, isn't that how you do sentencing, on a per victim basis?
You receive a sentence per conviction, but they can be served concurrently.
Okay, yeah. I love how the Daily Mail seemed to think that he served 6 weeks compared to the one said 2 weeks per victim.
Yeah, they're all wildly vacillating between the number of victims in all those reports. Some of them say 200 victims, some say 100 victims, and they're working out on the basis of that.
And they've all just done some maths to say, divide it by the number of victims, and therefore it's 6 weeks or 2 weeks.
Yeah. So anyway, all of this reporting is referring to the fact that this guy, John Warboys, who is a guy who was convicted of sexual offences in 2009, is set to be released from prison, having only served 8 years in prison for that for those offences. Mm-hmm. It's actually 10 because he served some time on remand, but 8, 10 is not much of a difference. People are outraged.
Is that what you tell your clients? 8 years of prison, 10 years of prison, it's all the same. Don't worry about it.
I don't see them at that end of their sentence. I see them at John Warboy's end of the sentence.
I see. Gotcha. But you,
so
you
not
weren't-
him. I hasten to add,
solicitor.
I wasn't Mr. Warboy's solicitor.
Sure.
On the surface, this sounds absolutely appalling. For someone to get 8 years for 200 rapes, it sounds absolutely ridiculous. Now, representing people at the Parole Board is a main part of my job. I appear regularly before the Parole Board representing people who've committed offences like those of Warboys and other serious offences. But the knowledge I have of this case is purely what's been reported, because, as I said, I wasn't his solicitor, so I'm basing this purely on what's been reported and my own knowledge. So what's gone wrong here? How can someone only have served 8 years for such a horrific number of offences and things? Well, the first thing is that few basic corrections. I've seen quite a few legal commentators have pointed out this. First of all, he's not at this point guilty of 100 rapes or 200 rapes. Someone who'd been convicted of 100 rapes would not have received a tariff of 8 years. They would have received a multiple decade minimum term. That's the first point to make. Anyone who's read past the headlines will have seen that.
Is this just the thing where, estimates say that his victims could be as many as ...
Yeah, they think
he wasn't actually tried and convicted for those things. Okay.
So he was convicted of 19 offences, which is still a high number of offences.
Okay.
Especially for 8 years as well.
Yeah, and he was charged with 23 and he was convicted of 19. They related to 12 victims, which is still a high number of victims. The offences involved him. He was a black cab driver, as the headlines suggest, and he would pick up women in his taxi. He would pretend that he had won the lottery or he'd won big in the casino. He wanted to celebrate with them, and so he would ply them with champagne to celebrate with him, and that champagne had drugs in it, and then that would affect them, and he would go on to sexually assault them. Now, he has been accused by a much larger number of women than he's been convicted of having assaulted. Many of them came forward when his case was in the paper, but also before, which I will get to. Now, one issue with it is because of the nature of the offending, there's an evidential problem because a lot of the women can't remember what happened because because of the drugging. And unfortunately, in courts in the UK, criminal courts, you need to meet the burden of proof which is beyond reasonable doubt. There needs to be some evidence to convict you on. And it seems like for a lot of those cases, unfortunately, there isn't the evidence, though we would obviously believe what a lot of them are saying, given the pattern. And
a lot of people would assume that after crimes like that, there'd be a whole lot of forensic evidence. But as you've talked about before, forensic evidence is overestimated and over-relied upon by the public.
Yes, it can be. So what I'm saying there is obviously it doesn't mean he hasn't committed them, but you can't sentence someone on the basis of something they might have done. Now, there were problems with that investigation. 2 of the people he was convicted of assaulting took the Metropolitan Police to court in 2014, alleging a breach of Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights. Does anyone know which one that is?
Article 3?
Right to fair trial?
No,
that would be the other side of that.
That would be Mr. Warboys,
no.
It's the right to...
I haven't bothered memorising because we're not going to have them for long anyway. It's fine. We're opting out.
Yeah, I'm getting my... Because I have a master's degree in human rights, I'm just using it while I can. No, so Article 3 is the freedom to be free from torture, inhumane and degrading treatment.
Jesus.
Right? And these women won in court on the basis that the investigation was so poor that they had infringed their right to be free from inhumane and degrading treatment. They weren't believed, they were fobbed off, all kinds of things.
I see.
And the women won that case. The Metropolitan Police appealed to the Court of Appeal. They lost. They appealed to the Supreme Court. We're waiting for a judgment on that. But no one disputes that they messed up the investigation. They're arguing about whether or not they should pay damages to the women.
But these are women who were victims of him. Who it hasn't been proven that he did it because it hasn't gone to trial because the police...
No, the women involved in this case were the victims he was convicted of assaulting.
They were convicted. Yeah. It's not like there's 2 more victims there that they are awaiting conviction because the police are holding things up by disputing the thing. That's okay.
They're disputing whether or not they have to pay damages because they don't want to be in a position where the police forces have to pay damages for messing up investigations.
Yeah,
that's what's going on there. But anyway, there are issues with this case, and if you're angry about aspects of that case, that's one area where perhaps your anger would be warranted. But to come back to Mr. Warboys, as I said, you can't sentence someone on the basis of something they might have done. You can only sentence them on the basis of things that you know that they have done. So he was convicted of 19 offences. Only one of those was rape. And I say only just because it's not 100.
Yeah.
It's one. I don't mean that rape's not important. And then there were 5 sexual assaults, 1 attempted sexual assault, and the other 12 were related to him drugging the victims. So for the 12 he was convicted of, 6 of them couldn't provide evidence of sexual assault. 6 of them could only provide evidence of, or I think it's 6 or 5 of them. Some of them couldn't provide evidence of assault, only of drugging.
Right, yeah.
So for that, which is still a serious rap sheet, he received something called an indeterminate sentence for public protection, or IPP, which is a kind of sentence that existed between 2005 and 2012.
We've spoken about these in the past.
You've either told us about it, or you might have mentioned it on the show last time.
I've ranted about them before.
But
I could do
I'm not sure if it was on the show.
Yeah. So I could do a whole piece about IPP sentences. So first of all, it was abolished in 2012 because they were deemed to be unlawful, but that's not relevant for Mr. Warboys. He received his when they were lawful. It's essentially a life sentence. So it was a life sentence for people who were convicted of serious, violent or sexual offences who would previously not have received a life sentence. And the people were worried that a lot of these offenders were being released without being rehabilitated when they clearly still were a risk. So they brought in this sentence where, like a life sentence for murder, where you'd get, say, a minimum of 20 years, this time you get a minimum that was much less. So in Mr. Warboys' case, 8 years. It could be as little as 6 months. And then in order to be released, you'd serve that minimum. That's the punishment part. And then after that, you could be let out by the parole board, assuming that your risk of serious harm was manageable.
Yeah.
Right? There are a lot of problems with that sentence because they gave them out like sweets to lots of people who in my view, shouldn't have received them. People who did commit arguably serious offences, but who, say, got a 6-month tariff in 2005 and are still in prison right now for a whole bunch of other reasons I won't get into now. But
they might not have been still in prison by this point had they just got a normal sentence.
Yeah, there are people now who've committed the same or worse offences who have been in and gone out again because the sentence has now been abolished, but the people who got them still have them. Okay, So Warboys had served the tariff, and his tariff was set at 8 years because if he hadn't received an IPP, he would have received a 16-year determinate sentence. And on a determinate sentence, where that's a sentence with a fixed end point, you are automatically released at the halfway point, 8 years.
Right.
8-year minimum. Now,
sorry, you're automatically released at the half. So presumably that's... presumably not automatically there's going to be something in there that would mean you do the full term.
No, on most people who receive a custodial sentence are released at the halfway point, and then they are on licence for the second half. If you breach your licence, you can then be recalled back to prison.
Okay, that's interesting. I've never understood that. I've got a 20-year sentence, so I get let out after 10 years, and I've never understood why that was the case. But okay, so you serve the back end of it on licence, which is where you can be recalled to prison at any point. Yeah. If you breach the terms of your licence.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people don't understand that, and I think a lot of tabloids don't understand that and play
which I'm going to get to. So even Mr. Warboys has been released on his 8-year tariff. Because of his IPP, he's on life licence. He will be on licence theoretically for the rest of his life. So he could be recalled at any point for the rest of his life if he breaches the terms of his licence.
Okay.
With an IPP, you can apply after 10 years on licence to have it removed, but that would be based on behaviour and is discretionary. Right. So theoretically, it could be for the rest of his life. Okay. So who makes this decision about whether or not risk is manageable for Mr. Warboys?
The Daily Mail.
They wish. No, it's the Parole Board, okay? So the Parole Board is a statutory body that's independent of the government, and they make binding decisions about who to release. And the separation is important there because it takes politics out of release decisions, and they can make what appear to be difficult decisions without interference, or at least they can at the moment, because at the moment they're now reviewing how the decisions are made in transparency because of this Warboys case. And I guess MPs and stuff are quite happy at the moment that they're independent because they can blame the Parole Board for all the flaws in this case. And there are flaws in this case. I don't think they rest with the Parole Board. As I mentioned, the issue with the investigation was the first point in terms of where you want to lay the blame. So the members of the Parole Board are appointed by the Secretary of State. They don't have to have any particular expertise in the criminal justice system, although they often do. So they're people like former police officers, probation, judges, lawyers, psychologists, psychiatrists, academics, people from the fire service. I think there's one member of the board who used to be a fireman, and people from the business community. It's basically any people you consider to be upstanding members of society can apply to be
Okay, a bit like
members
kind of
of the Parole board.
magistrates then, where you have like volunteer people who are going to magistrate court, and that's just people who want to do it, who've got a...
Yeah, but I mean, obviously the Parole board is a paid position, but that's who it's made up of. And how do they make the decision? So if you've read the articles in relation to this case, you might be under the impression that Mr. Warboys has somehow managed to magically manipulate or hoodwink these people who you might think are liberal, left-wing, out-of-touch people. How on earth have they managed to be convinced that he's eligible to be let out again? And I think some of the reporting from the weekend suggested that he's been saying things like he's found God, and that's why he's not going to attack anyone again. And people think that he's convinced people of that, and they're outraged, understandably.
Yeah, so
if that was the case,
and said it was someone else. Yeah.
If that was the case, I would be just as appalled as everyone else. So the test the Parole would have to apply is a simple one. It's very straightforward. It's not, has he been punished enough? Do we like him? It's is the risk of him causing serious harm, either physical or psychological, manageable in the community? That's the test.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't that there's no risk, because there's never no risk. Everyone has a risk of committing offences. It might be extremely low, but it's never nothing.
Some people want to throw babies out of windows, for example.
My sister's got a murder bus.
What?
All the people who she doesn't like in the world, she wants to put on the murder bus and drive it off a cliff.
She's driving it off a cliff?
Well,
that's a murder-suicide.
It would be driven off the cliff.
Okay.
It started off as something like, pushing someone off a cliff.
Oh, okay.
But she dislikes an awful lot of people, so it has evolved.
What
into
happens when it gets to more than what's the capacity of a double decker? 80, 110?
Murder train.
Murder train.
It's
hard
train.
to push a murder train off a cliff. You've got to lay the tracks towards the cliff. A lot of them are electrified. You've got to have a standing line with an electrical line through it.
Yeah, it
You
happens.
need one of the cartoons that has the railway tracks on the back of the rucksack.
It was something that we were sitting around. It wasn't this Christmas, but it was sitting around with the family at one Christmas, and someone had said, "Oh, could you kill somebody? If it came down to it, could you kill somebody?" Just as a conversation, and I kind of went, "Oh, I mean, I don't think so. I think I'd struggle with the guilt, and I don't." And
why didn't you just go no?
Well, even it because
it's Mike, and he's got to consider things from every
trying
single
to seriously
angle.
answer the question.
Okay.
Because it could be, in a very serious situation, a life or death situation. Could you kill someone? I'd struggle. I don't know.
Or assisted suicide.
Assisting a suicide.
I don't know if that would count as kill.
So, I mean, it would.
It would. It does under our current legal system.
Yes.
You are killing. You're maybe not murdering them, arguably, but you're certainly killing them.
When someone says,
you are
kill
still
someone?
currently murdering them.
You are indeed, but ethically, you could argue that you're not murdering them, but you're still killing them. So I sat there and kind of went, "Oh, I don't know," and kind of really struggled with the question, and said to "What about you, Archer?" "Oh yeah."
Yeah, she got the list out of the pocket.
just straight away, she goes, "Yeah," and my mum as well. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, and both of them, it came down to if someone hurt my kids.
Yeah,
I would just kill them just immediately. But I was like,
depends
fucking
how much
hell,
you hurt your kids.
Fucking hell, steady on.
There must be a threshold beyond which hurt.
If someone grazed the knee of my kids.
Exactly. Oh, sorry, I just stood on your toe there. Right, bam! Jesus Christ. Consigned to the murder bus.
Yeah. So don't piss off my family, apparently.
Apparently not.
Okay, noted. Right. So, as I said, it's purely about risk. So, and it's risk of harm specifically. So if there was really clear evidence, really strong evidence that someone is immediately going to go out and say steal from shops, is constantly stealing from shops, but it involves no harm, the Parole board don't care, essentially. That person will be released because it's about managing harm.
Okay, so the harm isn't... They wouldn't take into account financial harm to the shop.
No, physical and psychological serious harm.
So you get caught, you go back to prison, but we're not going to stop you, basically. Yeah.
Because I've had cases before where it's very clear that someone's almost immediately going to go out and prolifically shoplift, but that's not...
Prolifically shoplift?
Yeah, but that's not... it's not risk of harm.
How much
I live... My because of
and
the job that
their license and would be recalled,
because of the job that I do, my bar for what's serious is significantly higher than most other people's. I appreciate that.
What constitutes prolific shoplifting? Without going into specific details of your client.
Just doing it regularly. Just doing it all the time.
But I mean, if you're doing it regularly, that's regular shoplifting. Prolific sounds like you've got to be really making some...
Is prolific shoplifting stealing anti-abortion posters?
Oh, nice! Nice, yeah, thank you.
And then to come back to what we were saying before, an important point about determining whether or not that risk is manageable is the fact that someone will be on licence, especially if they're released on a life licence or an IPP licence, like Mr. Warboys will be. He will still be serving that sentence. He's serving that sentence for the rest of his life. Mm-hmm. Just for that part of it will be in the community. And he will be subject to a set of conditions, and that can be a very large list of all kinds of different conditions. That can be obviously regular meetings with probation and the police to check out where he is. He'll also be in a sex offender register for life, so he'll have to register where he lives. And if he's going somewhere for more than, I think, is it 3 days or something like that, he has to tell someone. Drug and alcohol testing, if that's appropriate. Tagging, disclosing details of any vehicles that he ever travels in. He will obviously never be allowed to be a taxi driver again, I'm assuming. Obviously, I don't know what the conditions were.
Those will be a reasonable clause.
Yeah, having to disclose any relationships that he gets into.
Why is the taxi driver one important specifically?
Well, because based on the information that I have, which is the same as everyone else, based on the reporting, his offending was very specifically related to the fact that he, in his taxi and picking up victims in that taxi, as far as I'm aware, none of his offences related to anything else. Mm-hmm. So you're managing that risk, and therefore if he's not allowed to be a taxi driver. That helps to manage the risk. Would that be likely? I mean, obviously you don't know this case, but you've been around other serious cases. Yep.
So if someone did have that kind of MO that they're always in a taxi, does that mean they'd be less likely to commit a crime if they weren't allowed to be in a taxi?
Well, generally speaking, and for these types of offences, and again I'm speaking very generally, especially if someone has a very specific MO as he appears to, it's not likely that he's going to suddenly branch out and do a completely different kind of sexual offending. People who commit sexual offences tend to stay within the thing that they like doing, if I can put it that weirdly, if that makes sense. There can also be exclusion zones and non-contact conditions with victims, and to make sure he doesn't run into them on the street, because obviously him running into one of his victims in the street would constitute serious psychological harm. There's also a catch-all condition. The first condition on people's licences is normally be of good behaviour and not do anything to damage your supervision, which can mean almost anything. And also recalls have increased 4,300% in the last 20 years. They do it all the time. They recall first and ask questions later. Breach of any of those conditions would get him sent back to prison very quickly. So obviously you might say, well, yeah, he's got to tell people, but how are you going to ensure that he tells people? Well, if he gets caught doing that once, he's back in jail.
So the assumption seems to be from the tabloid press then is that because he's no longer behind bars, he's therefore not serving a sentence. Whereas in fact, he is still serving a sentence and having severe restrictions placed on him. It's just within the community now instead of within a building full of bars.
Yeah, and I would assume, based on the notoriety of this case and the amount of offences, even if I only focus on the offences he's been convicted of, that risk management plan must be extremely robust. And I am going to assume the professionals involved were recommending his release. Because of that notoriety of this case and the Parole Board are very risk averse, in my view, they wouldn't have released him without those things, because the Parole Board aren't stupid. So other evidence, so the evidence that they make the decision on, what is it? Problem is, I hit a stumbling block here because I don't know. I wasn't in the hearing. I'm not his representative. I don't know specifically what the evidence was. Generally speaking, a dossier will be produced of the information about the prisoner. That will include it starts with the sentencing remarks and stuff. So that says how the judge berates them for what a terrible and evil person they are, and the Parole Board will have to think very hard before they let them out. Normally it says something like that. Reports about their behaviour through custody, reports from any courses they've completed, any psychology or psychiatric assessments that have been done if that's relevant. And speaking of courses, now the reported information suggests that at least until recently Mr. Warboys was maintaining innocence, so may not have completed any work. If he has completed any sex offender work, it will have been the sex offender treatment programme, which we talked about last time, which raises an interesting point. But
that's more likely to cause people to be worse.
Yeah, but we don't know. And the decision itself, even if we had the decision itself, that wouldn't necessarily tell you all the information they'd considered, because it's not a verbatim transcript. And also the way the rules work at the moment, the Parole Board are prohibited from disclosing Parole Board decisions and any information, because the documents contain lots of sensitive information, not just about him, Mr. Warboys, but about victims and things like that.
Absolutely.
So, also, as I've said, the Parole Board aren't stupid, and also they have to assume that the person before them has committed all of the offences they're convicted of. Even if someone goes in there and is maintaining their innocence, they have to assume they're doing that for some reason other than they are actually innocent.
Yeah.
So they can't rehash the trial. So if Mr. Warboys has gone in there and said, I didn't commit any of these offences, and I know that he did appeal at one point, so maybe that was his view, the parole would have to assume he did do it. He's saying he didn't do it for some other reason.
And that might go against him in the parole hearing.
It could do. Although the evidence about maintaining innocence suggests there isn't actually any link between recidivism and maintaining innocence. But
really,
yeah. But the general view is that people denying things must be more risky, and a lot of parole members have that view as well, in my experience.
And that comes, I guess, to a punitive thing as well. Is that it's hard to accept that someone has been rehabilitated if they don't, at least externally, accept that they did it in the first place.
Yeah, there's a very powerful drive for people to want to see remorse from somebody and assume that they need to see that in order for them to be rehabilitated. But the evidence suggests that actually you don't. But there's a powerful emotional drive the other way that people often have.
That must be a hard case to make as the solicitor as well. I presume you've been in positions then where... Have you ever represented someone in front of a parole board when they're maintaining innocence for something horrible?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the job then is slightly different in that you have to, rather than arguing about what caused them to commit the offence, you have to talk about what caused them to be in a position where they could be accused of committing that offence. Right, yeah. Which is a slightly different exercise.
Yeah.
It's not, you can be released from whilst maintaining innocence, it's just harder. So the parole board look at all of that evidence, and that evidence will often run to several hundred pages and often significantly more pages than that. It's a large body of evidence, and then they have a hearing, which is where I would represent my clients. And then at that hearing, you will have people who've worked with the prisoner in prison, his outside probation officer, the prisoner himself, who doesn't have to give evidence, but you almost usually would, because that's the point of a hearing, for them to put their view across. And the parole board asks questions, and I can ask questions that I think need to be asked if anything gets missed by the parole board, but they're generally quite good at sort of getting to the nub of issues and the crux of matters. So as I said, I don't think they would have released him without professional recommendations to release him, because the parole board, whilst they are independent, still obviously pay attention to the news and stuff and the notoriety. This case was in the papers. They are risk averse, in my experience, but by which I mean if there's any evidence potentially that they're going to be a risk, they tend to err on the side of caution rather. They don't release people on a whim. And one thing that they also consider is the victim perspective, which is another thing that's been in the papers, which is that a number of the victims have come forward and said they weren't aware that parole board was happening and they didn't realise he was going to be released. And if that has happened, if victims who he's been convicted of offending against haven't been made aware of that parole board, that is a failing. It's not a failing of the parole board, it's a failing of the victim liaison officer who is responsible for keeping the victims up to date as to what's going on. The victim can make an impact statement that can be read, and they can come to the hearing and read that out if they want. And they can also ask for non-contact conditions and exclusion zones where they live or whatever to make sure that they're protected from the perpetrator. I would obviously want them to look into that if someone hasn't been informed. From what Nick Hardwick, the chairman of the parole board, has said, the panel who made the release decision for Mr. Warboys were under the impression that all of the victims had been informed. Now, I'm not clear from the reporting whether the people who say they weren't informed are all victims who were subjects of the offences where he had been convicted, or they're the people who have made allegations against him. Because the people who made allegations, unfortunately, don't have a right to be informed. And that's perhaps something that should be amended in the rules, but the current rules, that's not how it works.
Yeah, so all the many people who he's suspected of assaulting who never went to trial or conviction, they could be the ones that are coming forward saying,
they could be.
This guy.
But I don't know, based on the reporting. And also the victim impact statement, whilst it can be read out and the parole board can consider it, that only really goes to risk, which is the thing they care about. If that impact statement says something like, Mr. Warboys has been constantly contacting me from custody and says he's going to come and find me when I go out, I'm really scared. Otherwise, unfortunately, it doesn't go to risk. And I appreciate that sounds really cold because, it's obviously a big deal for the victim, but that's how it works.
But yeah, and ultimately, victims of any crime are going to be more likely to say that person needs to stay in prison forever because obviously they're the ones who've been wronged, they're the ones who've been hurt, and it's why our system isn't built to be punitive with the victim at the top of it, but we have an independent judiciary for that reason.
Yeah. So essentially, in terms of this case then, we can't know for certain what evidence was heard, but based on I mean, it could be like, I think when we talked about this before the show, it could be something ridiculous that's happened, like some cataclysmic medical thing has happened to Mr. Warboy, so he has lost all sexual function. And that would make him eminently manageable from a sex offending point of view, but that's me wildly speculating.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I imagine that the risk management plan is extremely strict. It's not the case that he would have been hoodwinked, that he would have hoodwinked the parole board into letting him out, and then he's immediately going to go back, or would be even allowed to immediately go back. He's probably excluded from most of London, I would speculate, given the nature of the offending and where it took place. And the parole board do a very difficult job, and I think in my view they do it very, very well. I was just going through their annual reports, and they're up to their most recent one for 2016 and 2017. The serious reoffence rate for people they release, which means people who they've released who have then committed a serious offence, has been under 1% for, I think, the last 5 years. I couldn't say for certain before that, but it's under 1% for the last 5 years. There's always going to be some, just because based on statistics and probability. But I think under 1% is fairly good. So in the last year, they had 7,377 hearings, and they released 2,468 people.
Okay.
Which shows, obviously, that they err on the side of keeping people in.
Because to get to a hearing, you've got to be close to being able to be released by the judgment of who? Your lawyers or...
Well, hearings happen for a variety of... You don't necessarily have a hearing to argue for release. You could have a hearing to argue about what risks are still outstanding to be addressed.
Okay.
But most people who are having hearings want to be released or progressed. But under 1%, I think, is fairly good. And the number of hearings they have is increased significantly in recent years, but their serious reoffence rate hasn't.
Okay.
Which suggests that they're doing their job well. There were very serious problems with this case, and we certainly need to get to the bottom of the issue with the victims not being informed, and the issue with the investigation not happening properly. And also, Mr. Warboys wasn't charged with all those other allegations. There's no reason why, if they re-looked at it, they potentially couldn't charge him with them anyway. But again, without the rest of the information, I don't know.
But if he's to be charged with those other allegations now, would any of that count against... Would any of that mean extra jail time, or would it be sort of those would have been served concurrently?
If he were charged and convicted of more offences, he would serve more jail time.
Okay.
In conclusion, I think that whilst there are loads of serious issues with this case to be very angry about, I don't think they should be laid at the parole board's door. The parole board have, for years, prior to this case, been arguing that they want more transparency. They would like to publish their decisions. They would like to explain to the public how they work. So hopefully maybe this case will lead to that, but we need to be careful that it doesn't go too far the other way and we lose the independence, which is also very important.
So staying on relatively legal topics, I'm going to start 2018 as I spent much of 2017 updating people on what's happening to homeopathy on the NHS. 2017, it wasn't a strong year for the homeopaths, by all accounts, despite their optimism at their Christmas party, as mentioned in a previous episode, that they were going into the new year with an optimistic spirit. It was not a strong year for them, building on a fairly bad 2016 and a pretty rubbish 2015, in fact. And before I get to the latest big progress, it's perhaps worth just briefly recapping what the lay of the land was in 2014, because sometimes I genuinely find it quite hard to believe how far this issue has actually come in the last 4 years. Homeopathy has been funded on the NHS in this country through two routes. Prescriptions, which is where your GP writes out a prescription that you take to the chemist, and the chemist then gives you homeopathy right there. That's one route. The other route is direct commissioning, where your GP refers you to a homeopathy service. And that might be an NHS service at one of the 4 homeopathic hospitals that the country had in 2014, which, despite the name, are really little more than outpatient clinics, basically. Or it might be a referral to a private homeopathic practice that the NHS then picks the tab up for, as you might get with a physio, for example. So when I started with the Good Thinking Society in March 2014, nearly 4 years ago now, one of the first things that I did was to ask all 211 clinical commissioning groups, which are the bodies in the NHS that run GP surgeries all across the country, ask those 211 groups how much taxpayer money they each spend on homeopathy. And that's because up until then, nobody knew how much the UK spends on homeopathy, not the government, not the NHS, nobody. But by late 2014, I knew and we knew. The first thing we found out was that 180 of these 211 CCGs at the time in England did not fund homeopathy at all, which is a pretty good start. But there were 31 that did, plus there were 6 health boards in Scotland and 2 in Wales that funded homeopathy. In the northeast of England, CCGs in Gateshead, Newcastle West, South Tyneside and Newcastle North and East all funded homeopathy in 2013-14, but to a cumulative amount of just £231.39. And by 2014-15, they'd stopped. Strike 4 off that 31 list. Then here we are in the northwest. CCGs in central Manchester, Halton, Knowsley, Liverpool and Wirral, they all funded homeopathy, spending a cumulative £61,477 at Liverpool's homeopathic hospital in 2013-14. But 3 of those stopped completely in 2014-15 when the hospital facility was closed. And then Liverpool and the Wirral both stopped in 2016 after Weird Good Thinking Society publicly challenged Liverpool's decision to continue funding in spite of their consultation recommending that they stop. That's what made Liverpool and Wirral stop. We reversed the decision, got it back into public consultation. The public response was overwhelmingly against continuing funding, and by the start of 2017, there was no homeopathy in the Northwest. This is kind of a big previously on SWAC, really.
So there was a Liverpool homeopathic hospital. That became the Old Swan outpatient clinic.
It did, and then it became the Liverpool Medical Homeopathy Service, which was a private company owned by 2 GPs on the NHS who were also private homeopaths who were running the homeopathic hospital. Yeah. And when that closed, they set up their own private clinic to then get a contract with the NHS to see the same patients. Yeah. That has now subsequently closed, and their private clinic has closed too.
So the Liverpool Medical Homeopathy Service has also closed, as well as the Liverpool Homeopathic Hospital.
Yeah, as I understand it. I think last time I saw anything from them, they were looking to see whether it was worth them keeping up a private practice. Right. But certainly it's got no NHS component to it anymore. The Southwest is a slightly trickier story. There were 5 CCGs funding homeopathy at the Bristol Homeopathic Hospital to the tune of £242,303 in 2013-14. But then even there, great strides have been made. The hospital closed its doors in 2015, taking with it the smaller funding provided by NHS Dorset CCG. And I spent the last 3 years in correspondence with the other CCGs in the area, highlighting pretty much every time any other decision about homeopathy is made around the country to stop funding it, highlighting that to these CCGs to say, do you want to be the last ones to turn the lights off, basically? Whenever there's a consultation, point them to the evidence, point them to decisions, and querying the amount that they spend each year, and actually trying to find out and keep tracks of the amount they spend each year. As a result of that, plus plenty of other factors, I'm sure, 2017 was a significant year in the southwest for homeopathy. We had NHS Bristol, North Somerset and South Gloucestershire all having consultations on homeopathy, though those consultations are going to be repeated at the start of 2018 for various boring reasons, really. But even as they continue funding it for now, NHS Bristol's funding dropped by 1/3, South Gloucestershire's dropped by 1/4, and North Somerset's by 1/5. NHS Somerset, the 5th of the ones down there in the southwest, won't be part of the 2018 consultation because they stopped funding homeopathy in November 2017. They just stopped.
They've just flat out stopped. Okay.
Now, it might seem disappointing that the Bristol consultation, which happened in the middle of 2017, and we asked lots of listeners to take part and submit their thoughts and kind of let them know what you think, it might seem disappointing that they're going to repeat that consultation in 2018. You might think that this means no progress has been made or that was a waste of time. But I don't think so. I think there's good reasons for optimism. The results of that first consultation were actually put on hold to await the results of the NHS England consultation on blacklisting homeopathy, which again came about after our correspondence with the Department of Health and with NHS England. And the results that NHS England won were damning for homeopathy. They called for the Department of Health to blacklist homeopathy and said no GP should trust in homeopathy. So the new Bristol consultation that's going to be taking place in the next couple of months will have those results as part of their evidence deck. And it's fair to say I'm watching closely with great interest, and I'll talk about it as soon as that one's open. But I think if they were close to getting rid of it based on the previous set of evidence, now they've got, and they said we just need to see what NHS England have to say. NHS England said stop this immediately. Yeah, I think that's going to weigh in our favour rather than against and in favour of homeopathy.
Now, there was a homeopathic hospital in Bristol as well, wasn't there? Because all these CCGs that fund homeopathy, they're all clustered around the sites of current or former homeopathic hospitals, isn't it?
So the Bristol Homeopathic Hospital shut in, I think it was October 2015, 2015 it shut. Became the Portland Centre for Integrative Medicine, which again is a private practice run by a homeopath who has a contract with the NHS, but that contract, as I've been showing, is starting to dwindle and is currently under threat.
Yeah, okay.
Wales had 2 health boards funding homeopathy in 2014, but they spent cumulatively £316 a year. 2 years later, it was gone. Homeopathy was gone in Wales. NHS Wales was homeopathy free. Scotland spent £1.9 million on homeopathy in 2014-15 across their 6 health boards. But by 2017, both NHS Western Isles and NHS Shetland had entirely stopped. Plus, there arose some question marks about how much of that 1.9 million was genuinely just on homeopathy, and how much of it was on the other complementary services provided at the Glasgow Homeopathic Hospital, renamed the Glasgow Centre for Integrative Care, the GCIC. So there is a bit of a question mark as to when they say this is how much we spend on homeopathy, are they terming herbal medicine and acupuncture in there? Because it turns out not everyone involved in reporting on the NHS knows what homeopathy is or what constitutes a homeopathic remedy.
And that's something that we found as well, even in homeopathy consultations, like the Wirral homeopathy consultation, where people rocked up saying, "Don't stop my Iscador."
Yeah,
and
exactly,
it's like, but that's not homeopathy, mate. That's something different altogether.
And as we pointed out at the time, it was us who were there pointing out that Iscador wasn't homeopathic. It wasn't the homeopath pointing out that Iscador isn't homeopathic, because one could argue cynically I could see them having the opinion that those people are on my side, so why should I correct them, because they might not be on my side if they actually know the facts. So I thought that was quite interesting. But even if all £1.7 million spent for 2017 in Scotland is accurate, the Glasgow Centre for Integrative Care is under more scrutiny and more pressure than ever before, and every NHS body that drops homeopathy just increases that pressure on them. And then we have the London issue. Now, I've mentioned the London issue before on the show, a few years ago when I started asking all the CCGs. Because when I asked every CCG in the country, 17 of them replied to say, homeopathy is not routinely funded. Funding would only be considered if exceptional circumstances demonstrated through an individual funding request, an IFR, but there were no such requests in 13-14. There may, however, be some activity relating to historical referrals that predate the policy. Please note that the CCG does not hold the details for expenditure specifically on homeopathy with the Royal London Hospital for Integrative Medicine, which is part of University College London Hospital's NHS Foundation Trust. That's the RLHIM, previously known as the London Homeopathic Hospital. So this I characterised as, we don't know if we fund homeopathy or not, which is basically where those CGs were. The CCGs have a policy, and that policy is called the Procedures of Limited Clinical Effectiveness. And this is a very important policy. So I don't normally go into the names and details of policies, because I find that a bit boring, and listeners might too. But this is a really important policy, because among other things, it says that there is no homeopathy allowed unless a patient gets an individual funding request. An IFR is where your GP has to go in front of a panel of other GPs and convince these other GPs that homeopathy is right for them. And there were none of those successfully funded in London. But those CCGs in London give a chunk of their money to UCLH, who run the local hospitals in London, and the CCGs couldn't be sure that some of their money wasn't going to the Royal London Hospital for Integrative Medicine and then being spent on homeopathy. Now, bear in mind, we know full well that homeopathy was taking place at the RLHIM, also known as a homeopathic hospital, for one thing, not least because Dr. Peter Fisher, the Queen's homeopath, works there and has spoken about the treatments he gives his patient, including on television. He's gone on TV and say, I give patients at the RLHIM homeopathy. He's been very vocal against any work we've done to highlight and challenge homeopathy provision on the NHS. And as we saw it, if Fisher is working at the RLHIM and in his own admission is giving homeopathy to patients at the RLHIM, and the RLHIM has to get all of its funding from CCGs, and those CCGs have a no homeopathy policy, those must still be funding homeopathy through the back door without realising. Because the only source of money is these CCGs, and they're saying don't fund it, but we know that they're definitely funding it. So the problem was, when you ask the RLHIM via Freedom of Information how much they spend on homeopathy, they tell you they don't know and they've got no way of checking. So you ask them, well, how many patients has your homeopathy service had in a given time period? And they tell you they don't have a homeopathy service. Okay, but yeah, you do give people homeopathy. Yes, but we don't have a dedicated homeopathy service. We have care pathways. So you go, well, what services do you have? And they say, well, these care pathways are based on what conditions a patient has. Let's say you've got insomnia. You go down the insomnia care pathway. You see a specialist insomnia who then decides what to treat your insomnia with.
Homeopathic owl.
Well, yeah. Well, this is the thing. According to the RLHIM, when a patient enters that hospital, they're recorded via their condition, and then no record is made as to which patient gets which type of treatment. You are an insomnia patient. You walk around that building as an insomnia patient. You sit in a consultation room seeing an acupuncturist or a homeopath or a cognitive behavioural therapist, but your record just says insomnia consultation. Now, there's no reason, as far as I could tell, that the RLHIM doesn't record what treatment that you give. But if this is true, and it seems to be the case, this is obviously astonishing to me.
Yeah.
This has to be staggering. I mean, can you imagine a scenario where you go to hospital for any other condition, and the hospital only took note of what condition you had, but not what they did to you?
Yeah.
This seems amazing. Imagine a cancer patient whose notes just said, they saw an they saw an oncologist, got treatment from an oncologist, and took the treatment the oncologist gave them, but never mentioned the name of their chemotherapy. It would be insane, and that hospital would be under all sorts of scrutiny and pressure. But this is apparently what the RLHM say that they do. So for these 17 CCGs, this presented an issue. If you send a patient to the RLHM with essentially a sticker saying, do not give this patient homeopathy without asking us first, and the RLHM never ask you if they can give them homeopathy, and you talk to all the other CCGs, and they've got the same no homeopathy stickers too, but there are homeopaths going on telly telling people they give homeopathy to patients at the RLHM, what can you do if you're one of those CCGs? Mm-hmm. Especially when you might be spending at most, $200,000. So I think we had it about £178,000 per CCG in London on homeopathy, out of your budget of maybe £400 million for the thousands and thousands of people that your borough is going to look after. I imagine it's pretty hard to keep that little spend on homeopathy as your priority, even if you're getting semi-regular correspondence from a charity trying to bring your attention to what looks like a clear breach of your policies and how hospitals can spend your money.
Mm-hmm.
As it happens, we got a break from an unexpected source. On the 29th of March 2017, a Mr. David Tredinnick MP got up in Parliament to talk about the challenges to homeopathy on the NHS. And among other things not worth our time discussing, he said, I spoke to the director, Peter Fisher, and I have a briefing note from him. Dr. Fisher says, the RLHIM has an agreement with the North London cluster of clinical commissioning groups led by Camden for clinical care pathways for 13 conditions. Patients who do not have these conditions can be treated if normal treatments have failed or have caused serious adverse effects, and in certain other circumstances. The Good Thinking Society is attempting to close the latter pathway. This would cripple the hospital, preventing it from providing homeopathy, herbal and other treatments, and from treating cancer patients. This struck us as pretty interesting, partly because none of that really reflects what we've been doing, but nevertheless. It seemed like a tacit admission by Dr. Fisher that the RLHIM was not abiding by the procedures of limited clinical excellence, the POLCE policy, specified by the CCGs, and that they had some other arrangement in place. It also struck Alan Hennis of the Nightingale Corporation as quite interesting, so he sent an FOI to the hospital asking to see the briefing note that Fisher sent Tredinnick. Mm-hmm. And he got it back. Eventually, he got it back. And this is what this is what some of the note reads. Our NHS commissioning arrangement is with the North Central London cluster of CCGs, brackets, 6 clinical commissioning groups in North London, close brackets. I'll stop there. It's 5, not 6. He's wrong. The NCL CCGs are Barnet, Camden, Enfield, Haringey and Islington. So he's wrong on that. But that's a minor detail that he has no reason to know who his agreement is with. He says, we agreed clinical care pathways for 13 conditions. Patients who do not suffer from one of these conditions, we established with the CCGs, quote, pre-agreed exceptionalities, which allow us to treat patients under specific circumstances. The most important of these is that there are normal treatments which are listed have failed have caused serious adverse effects. We're currently undertaking an audit of this in cooperation with Camden CCG to ensure that patients do indeed meet these criteria. He goes on to say the Good Thinking Society is threatening legal action in an attempt to close off this route by enforcing the procedures of limited clinical effectiveness policy. This would mean that patients, including those referred for cancer, would have to go through the individual funding request process, which is very bureaucratic and usually ends in refusal. Our arrangement with the CCGs has worked smoothly for several years.
Now, I see when they say cancer patients there, this is for side effects of chemotherapy. They're not treating people for cancer.
I don't know.
Because that would be madness.
That would be madness. But we also know that there are NHS doctors who prescribe Iscador, which they will happily refer to as a homeopathic treatment, and they will happily say to in other places that they believe it cures cancer. I don't know. He's talking about referrals for cancer patients. He doesn't go into it.
Yeah.
We haven't seen anything in either direction. I wouldn't want to speculate as to that.
But that sounds like Peter Fisher thinks that there are 2 different routes that you can get homeopathy from CCG, agreed by CCGs. One is the IFR system and one is a different system. And the CCG is saying No, there's just one system.
Well, we'll come to that, you see. This, I think, was quite interesting, because he says we're trying to close off this pre-agreed exceptionalities route through apparently legal threats. The funny thing is, we'd never heard of a pre-agreed exceptionalities route. We'd written to Camden CCG a year previously to that to point out that they've got this no homeopathy sticker, the procedures of limited clinical excellence, effectiveness rather, and yet they appear to be spending money at the RLHIM, and we were unable to ascertain from anybody involved whether or not some of that money was spent on homeopathy in contravenance of the CCG's policies. In fact, the audit that Fisher mentioned that the RLHIM was undertaking in conjunction or collaboration with Camden was partly a response to us asking Camden how they can be sure their money wasn't being spent on homeopathy or other treatments that were explicitly not funded by the policy. And it's worth mentioning that the letter that Fisher referred to us sending to Camden contained no legal threats. At no point did we mention any legal action or any threat of legal action. It just was not in there. But we now had two things to follow up on. This audit with Camden and this list of pre-agreed exceptionalities that we hadn't heard of before. But if true, it would actually mean, if this genuinely existed, and if it was there, it would mean the Royal London Hospital Integrative Medicine might have been acting entirely legally in giving homeopathy to patients from CCGs whose POLCE policy said don't give it. But bear in mind, this policy is literally a list of treatments that are not to be funded without certain circumstances being met. So it would be pretty odd that there was a separate agreement on conditions that would mean that list could be ignored. Like why you wouldn't just incorporate...
And the cancer might be on there.
And that cancer might be on there, exactly. Why you wouldn't just incorporate those conditions into the POLCE.
Yeah.
So obviously the next step was to ask all of the CCGs for a copy of this pre-agreed exceptionalities agreement, and none of them have heard of it. In fact, the group carrying out the audit found the mention of such an agreement by the head of homeopathy at the hospital to be very interesting, because no CCG or the body operating the NCL cluster had any record of any list of pre-agreed exceptionalities, nothing that they could see that referred to that could be referred to by that term. Now, to be fair, I asked the RLHIM what Fisher was referring to, and they told me he was referring to an agreement from before the CCGs existed. Which the RLHIM admitted didn't actually mention homeopathy. They said, we agreed with primary care trusts, which were there before CCGs, that in certain circumstances when the normal treatments have failed or when there's side effects, we can do something else. So the agreement that Fisher said was with the 6 NCL CCGs to allow homeopathy to be given outside of the POLCE was actually an agreement with the bodies that preceded the 5 NCL CCGs that didn't mention homeopathy and predated the policies that the CCGs wrote specifically to handle homeopathy and things like it. So that's quite an interesting thing to find out about, and it's an interesting thing we'd never have known about had Mr. Tredinnick not got up in Parliament and mentioned it. Now, that's one of the routes. The other route, the audit, Camden CCG. On behalf of the 5 CCGs in the NCL CCG cluster, they carried out an audit of 181 consecutive patients referred to the RLHIM from one of their 5 CCGs, okay? And they followed those patients through the care pathways to see in detail what treatments they get, to try and get around the fact that it wasn't being recorded, that records were being kept. Follow these patients through and see exactly what happens, what interactions they have and what treatments they get. And then find out whether or not those treatments met the policies of those CCGs, this POLCE policy. The first thing they found was that the RLHIM were not applying the POLCE policy correctly. They were applying the policy to the first treatment that a patient receives, but not to every subsequent treatment they received. So if you got in and if you went in for insomnia and you got acupuncture, and from there you referred to the herbal treatment, and from there you were referred to the homeopathy, and then you got a bit of Iscador or whatever, the RLHIM would only check the POLCE on acupuncture and not the rest of the things. Whereas a CCG expect every treatment you're given to be checked first to make sure you're allowed to be given it.
Because that's how treatments work.
Yeah,
and CCGs work.
Yeah, and the RLHIM argued that we already fill in so many different forms and things that to go through and check every treatment against the PLC would be too much effort. It would be a bureaucratic burden that they shouldn't be expected to take on. Again, think of that if this was any of the
hospitals. If you're in a hospital and a hospital's not gone, maybe I should check that I'm allowed to give this patient penicillin or something else that might cause dangerous effects in some patients.
Yeah, it's astonishing to me. Now, the audit also lists the most frequent treatments by the RLHIM and examines whether they comply with the POLCE or not. And I hope everyone's following the acronyms I'm throwing out, because it's a lot more dense than I normally do, but I think it's quite an interesting story to tell. So of the most frequent, they had 29 acupuncture treatments in that 181 examined. 20 of them were found to be in breach of the PLCE. Although the RLHIM argued that only 11 were in breach. They said, no, we're actually right. That's because of the way that they do this system.
So he fucked it up, but only this much.
Well, yeah, exactly. We say, well, no, okay, we should have done it that time, but not these other times. We're right. Well, the CCGs argued, actually, we're right. We set the policy. We understand how we apply our policy. Of the 41 homeopathy treatments examined, 41 were in breach of the POLCE. Although the RLHIM argued that only 3 were in breach. They disputed 38 of the 41 breaches. But as far as the CCGs were concerned, every single time they saw a patient given homeopathy, that was in breach of their policy, which makes sense because their policy says no homeopathy without an IFR. You haven't given us an IFR.
Yeah.
And then 12 out of 12 of the herbal treatments were also in breach of the PLCE, of which the RLHIM agreed that only 1 was in breach. So in total, of the 181 treatments examined, the CCGs found 102 breaches, most of which were in the top 5 most frequent treatment modalities. In fact, of those top 5, 84 out of 94 treatments were in breach. This is widespread non-compliance with the PRC. This audit has major significance for homeopathy in London. For one, the RLHIM, as a result of this audit, are no longer allowed to check for themselves whether a treatment is in breach of the policy or not. They have to refer to the CCGs to do it every time. So now the CCGs get to say whether a treatment is allowed or not, or whether a treatment meets their policy. That's pretty significant. Because the CCGs have all stated that homeopathy is in breach of the PLC unless it has a successful IFR. And as Dr. Fisher himself said, almost always IFRs end in refusal because, and this is my words, homeopathy isn't evidence-based or effective, and most doctors recognise that. The UCLH, the care trust that operates the RLHIM, on behalf of the hospital, has therefore proposed to cease providing any homeopathic drugs on the NHS. Done. In London, the RLHIM is no longer going to be providing homeopathic drugs on the NHS. It's right there in the audit response in black and white. No longer provide NHS homeopathy. In fact, the RLHIM has had to give back around £60,000 to the CCGs to make up for spending their budget on homeopathy in breach of their policies. Now, that's not to say that's how much they'd spent, but that's what they've settled on as a sum that would be illustrative of the point that they were spending money they shouldn't have been. Plus, they're no longer even allowed to provide Iscador in the NHS either. That's just immediately stopped too.
Okay.
This doesn't necessarily mean the end of homeopathy at the RLHIM, but it does mean the end of NHS homeopathy there. We're still to see whether whether that means that UCLH make their homeopathy department a private paying service, or whether it completely moves out, or what quite happens there, where they rent the space out to a homeopathy clinic who then takes private patients. And we need to watch that carefully to make sure there isn't a backdoor there to spending. For example, requiring patients to pay for their own homeopathy, but having the consultations with homeopaths still taking place at the RLHIM on NHS time. Those are the areas in London that we need to pay attention to in 2018.
But what we've seen at other former homeopathic hospitals is when the NHS money dries up, there wasn't enough private money to keep the practice going.
That's exactly right.
Which may or may not be the case in London, but there's a possibility that might end up what's happened. They tried to convert it to a private practice, but actually there isn't enough private money going around to keep that running. Yeah,
exactly. Since we estimate it's about £3 million was going on homeopathy in London. So we think this is the end of that. Probably not immediately, but certainly pretty quickly as far as we can tell. If this all pans out and if there isn't some different way of funding it that they agree on. But looking at the way the CCGs reacted to the audit and the way that they reacted to the information that they were getting about the POLCE, it looks like this is it. So in summary, of the 31 CCGs and 8 health boards who funded homeopathy in 2013, 22 have subsequently stopped funding. I'm awaiting confirmation that 10 more in London are stopping because the RLHIM has been told to stop. 3 are currently undertaking a second round of consultation to happen in early 2018, and just 4 NHS bodies in the entire of the UK continue funding without currently underway procedures to review their spending, or at least without us being aware of such procedures. They might be happening, we might not know about them yet. That's what happened to homeopathy on the NHS in 2017, and I think we can expect 2018 to have some pretty big headlines too.
So Liverpool Skeptics at the Pub is a week today. That's on the 18th of January at our new venue.
Shiny new venue.
It's not at our standard venue, which is the Vines. It is not at the Vines. It is going to be
not at the Vines.
At Hoos.
Then you'll know it's not the Vines because you'll turn up to the Vines expecting the venue event to be on, and the Vines will be shut.
And they'll be closed,
as appears to be the standard practice with the Vines these days. Is there an event on tonight? Yes. Is it open? No. Brilliant. Cheers, guys.
So that is Ed Zardernst, who's going to be talking about his adventures as a scientist in Wonderland. That's going to be at Hoos, which is on Tithe Barn Street in Liverpool. It's quite near to
James Street,
and Moorfields stations.
It's actually quite easy to get to. It's like a little bit hard to find on the street, but it's easy to get to. And
also,
it's a decent venue.
Once you find it, you know you found it because it's got the word Hoos written outside it in 4-foot high letters.
Yes.
And in January,
into the ground.
January they've got 50% off food. So if you turn up a little bit early, just to make sure you can definitely find it this first time you're coming to our new venue, you can have a bite to eat. They do like Scandinavian meatballs and stuff.
They do Scandinavian meatballs.
Yeah.
They do good chips.
Yeah.
Do decent chips. Okay.
Triple cooked ones.
If you want to
on the yes list,
get in there, have some beer, like.
And then we'll be downstairs in the concrete bunker.
So we will be downstairs at Hoos. So that's going to be from 7:30 on the 18th of January, and that's going to be Ed Zardernst. Aside from that, then, that is all we have time for. All that remains then is for me to thank Marsh for coming along today.
Thank you.
And thank you to Alice.
Thank you.
And special thanks to our special guest, Emma.
I won't talk about sex offenders next time.
I don't think that's a promise you can make.
No, you definitely cannot guarantee that.
I'll try. But you're welcome.
Our special sex offender correspondent, Emma McClure.
We've been Skeptics with a K, and we will see you next time.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.
Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptics Society. For more information, visit our website www.merseysideskeptics.org.uk or email podcast@merseysideskeptics.org.uk.